Katherine Whitmore paid a homeless man $250,000 to father her child. No strings, no emotions, just a contract signed in a luxury hotel room that should have been simple. 9 months later, when they placed the baby in her arms, she froze because the child had ice-blue eyes and translucent pale skin, features that were genetically impossible given her Mediterranean descent and Marcus Bennett's African-American heritage. The DNA tests confirmed they were both parents, but buried in the report were words that made her blood run cold: engineered, enhanced cognition, and non-human pattern recognition. And when she checked the security footage from the delivery room, 17 minutes were missing, with a shadowy figure standing in the corner just before the cameras went black. Before we continue this wonderful story, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. Now let's get to where the story began. Katherine Whitmore was a 52-year-old woman who had everything: money, power, and a name that made Wall Street executives straighten their ties. But that winter night, standing alone in her Manhattan penthouse, she realized that despite all the luxury surrounding her, there was one thing her billions hadn't bought: a child. She needed an heir. Not just any child, but someone who would carry forward everything she had built. But Katherine didn't want a family in the traditional sense. She had tried that route 4 times, in fact, and each marriage ended in failure and bitter divorce settlements. She had endured a dozen IVF attempts that left her body exhausted and her heart hollowed out. She thought love was a distraction, something that only brought complications and compromise. But a child was different. A child was legacy. A child was the one piece of her empire that would outlive quarterly earnings and stock prices. And now, she was determined not to seek a relationship for this. She needed a clear agreement, without emotional entanglements. Just a contract. Katherine knew that with her resources, she could find someone willing to father the pregnancy without questions or emotional ties. For Katherine, this was a transaction, and like all her transactions, she would have total control. But this time, she wanted something different from the sterile catalogs of anonymous donors. She wanted survival in that DNA. She wanted grit. She wanted someone who had known struggle and endured. Now she just needed to find someone who would accept the deal. That someone turned out to be Marcus Bennett, a homeless man she encountered on a cold November night outside a Harlem jazz bar. He wasn't begging or panhandling. He was simply there, waiting for something or nothing. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. "You lost, lady?" he asked, his voice deep and tired. "No," Katherine replied, her mind already calculating. "I think I just found something." But to understand how a billionaire CEO and a homeless man came to sign the strangest contract either had ever seen, you need to know who Katherine Whitmore really was beneath the Forbes covers and boardroom power plays. You need to understand the woman who built an empire but couldn't build a family. And you need to know what she was truly running from, and what she was desperately running toward. It all started years before that fateful night in Harlem, not with Katherine's empire or her failed marriages, but with a man who once had everything that mattered and lost it all in a single night. Marcus Bennett wasn't always homeless. 10 years ago, he was a truck mechanic in the Bronx with grease under his fingernails and pride in his chest. He had a wife, Diane, who laughed like summer rain, and a son, Devon, who was 7 years old and obsessed with dinosaurs. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom house with a front porch that Marcus had rebuilt himself. He wasn't rich, but he was whole. Then came the fire. It started in the kitchen. Faulty wiring, the investigators said. Marcus had been working a double shift at the garage. By the time he got the call, the flames had already swallowed everything. Diane died trying to reach Devon's room. Devon never made it out of his bed. The house became a tomb, and Marcus became a ghost. The guilt ate him first. Then came the whiskey. Then came the pills. Anything to silence the screams he heard in his sleep. Anything to erase the image of that charred doorframe where his family had been. He lost his job 6 months later. Lost his apartment a year after that. The streets became his home, and survival became his only purpose. By the time Katherine Whitmore found him outside that jazz bar, Marcus Bennett had been invisible for so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. 1 week after their first encounter, Katherine's assistant called him. The number came from a shelter phone Marcus sometimes borrowed. The woman on the line was polite but distant, like she was scheduling a dental appointment. "Ms. Whitmore would like to meet with you tomorrow evening, the Ritz-Carlton, Suite 4701, 7 o'clock sharp." Marcus almost hung up, but something, curiosity, desperation, or maybe just the faint memory of feeling like he mattered, made him say yes. He showed up in the only clean clothes he owned, a donated flannel shirt and jeans that didn't quite fit. The lobby staff looked at him like he was a stain on their marble floors, but the woman at the desk had his name on a list. She handed him a key card without a word. Suite 4701 wasn't a room. It was a kingdom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, furniture that cost more than his old house, and Katherine Whitmore standing by the window in a black blazer that could have paid his rent for a year. She turned when he entered, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming." "Didn't think I had much choice," Marcus said, his voice rougher than he intended. Katherine gestured to the table where 2 glasses of water sat beside a leather folder. "Sit, please." He did, though every instinct told him to run. Katherine didn't waste time. She sat across from him, folded her hands, and spoke like she was presenting a quarterly report. "I want to be direct. I'm offering you $250,000 to father my child. No parental rights, no involvement. No contact after the process is complete. You would undergo medical screening, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and provide what's needed for artificial insemination. After that, you walk away. The money is yours. No strings attached." Marcus stared at her. Then he laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the expensive silence. "Lady, I ain't no damn science experiment." "I'm not asking you to be," Katherine replied, her tone ice cold. I'm asking you to help me build something that matters, and in return, I'm offering you a chance to rebuild your life." Rebuild. Marcus's jaw tightened. "You don't know a damn thing about my life." "You're right, I don't." Katherine leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp. "But I know you're surviving, not living. I know you sleep in shelters and eat at soup kitchens. I know you've given up. This is a way out." Marcus wanted to throw the water in her face. He wanted to tell her that his life wasn't for sale, that he wasn't some commodity she could buy off the street. But the truth was harder to swallow. He had given up. And $250,000 could change everything. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Katherine paused, and for the first time, something human flickered in her expression. "Because you've survived something most people couldn't. Because I don't want perfection in a catalog. I want resilience. I want life that's been tested." She slid the folder toward him. "Read it. Think about it. You have 48 hours to decide." Marcus didn't sleep that night. He read the contract a dozen times, each word colder than the last. Medical exams, legal waivers, non-disclosure clauses that could ruin him if he ever spoke a word. It was clinical, transactional, completely void of humanity. But it was also $250,000. 2 days later, Marcus returned to the suite. Katherine was waiting, same blazer, same unreadable face. He placed the signed contract on the table between them. "I got one condition," Marcus said. "If this kid ever needs to know where he came from, you tell him the truth. You don't lie about me." Katherine held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Agreed." 3 weeks later, the process began. Katherine's assistant scheduled everything under a code name, Project Haven. The medical facility was private, sterile, and silent. Marcus sat in a cold room answering questions about his health history while nurses drew vial after vial of blood. Katherine was in another wing, preparing for the insemination procedure. She lay on the examination table, staring at the ceiling, her mind somewhere far away. Her assistant knocked softly before entering. "Ms. Whitmore, everything's ready. Project Haven is a go." Katherine closed her eyes. Project Haven. Only she knew the name wasn't random. 28 years ago, she had given birth to a daughter in a county hospital. The baby lived for 11 minutes. Katherine had held her once, kissed her forehead, and named her Haven before the monitors went silent. This child, this transaction, was supposed to fill that void. But as the procedure began, Katherine felt something she hadn't expected. Fear, not of failure, but of what might happen if this actually worked. The test came back positive on a Thursday morning in March. Katherine stared at the 2 pink lines in her private bathroom, her hand trembling for the first time in years. She was pregnant, at 52. With a child fathered by a homeless man she'd paid like a contractor. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt terrified. Within 48 hours, Katherine had made her move. She told her board she was taking a 6-month sabbatical for personal health reasons, vague enough to avoid questions, firm enough to end discussion. She appointed her COO as interim leader and disappeared from Manhattan like smoke. The estate in upstate New York had been in her family for 3 generations, a sprawling property hidden behind iron gates and ancient oak trees. No paparazzi, no reporters, no one who could leak a story that would destroy her reputation and turn her unborn child into a tabloid spectacle. Katherine Whitmore, the woman who commanded boardrooms and dominated headlines, vanished into silence. The first trimester was brutal. Morning sickness hit her like a hostile takeover, relentless, unforgiving, stripping away her control. She spent mornings hunched over the toilet in a marble bathroom that suddenly felt too large, too empty. Her assistant Claire was the only person who knew the truth, sworn to secrecy with an NDA that could end careers. But something unexpected began to happen as the weeks passed. Katherine started talking to the baby. At first, it was practical. "You're costing me a fortune in ginger tea," she muttered one afternoon, rubbing her swollen belly. Then it became softer. Late at night, when the estate was silent and the moon hung low over the hills, she would sit in the nursery she'd quietly assembled and whisper things she'd never said aloud. "I don't know if I'll be good at this. I don't know if I even know how." She had built empires, crushed competitors, survived betrayals that would have destroyed weaker people. But this? A tiny heartbeat growing inside her? It unraveled something she'd kept locked away for decades. Was this still a transaction? Or had it become something deeper, something she couldn't control or buy her way out of? The question haunted her every night. Meanwhile, across the state, Marcus Bennett was trying to build a life from the ashes. The first thing he did with the money was check into a rehabilitation center in Brooklyn. It wasn't glamorous, shared rooms, bad coffee, group therapy sessions that made him want to scream, but it was clean. And for the first time in years, Marcus felt like maybe, just maybe, he could be clean too. He sat in circles with strangers and told the story he'd buried. Diane, Devon, the fire, the guilt that had swallowed him whole. A counselor with kind eyes told him it wasn't his fault. Marcus didn't believe her, but he listened anyway. After 90 days, he moved into a small studio apartment in Queens. It had a bed, a kitchen, and a window that let in actual sunlight. He got a job at an auto repair shop. Nothing fancy, just oil changes and brake pads. But it was honest work. His hands remembered the tools. His mind remembered purpose, but the nightmares wouldn't stop. Every night, Marcus dreamed of fire. But now there was something else in the flames. A child crying. Not Devon, someone new. A voice he didn't recognize calling for him through the smoke. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, his heart hammering, the name Haven echoing in his skull, though he'd never heard it before. He didn't know why. He didn't know what it meant. But something told him this wasn't over. Katherine's dreams were different, but no less haunting. She dreamed of Haven, her firstborn, the daughter who'd lived for 11 minutes. In the dreams, Haven was grown, standing at the edge of a dark river, her face obscured by shadows. She never spoke, but Katherine could feel her watching, waiting. One night, 6 months into the pregnancy, the dream changed. Haven turned toward her, and for the first time Katherine saw her face clearly, but it wasn't a woman's face. It was a child's. Pale skin, blue eyes, eyes that shouldn't exist. Katherine woke up gasping, her hands clutching her stomach. The baby kicked hard as if responding. She whispered into the darkness, "Who are you?" No answer came. But deep down, Katherine felt it. This baby wasn't just hers. This baby was connected to something older, something buried, something she didn't yet understand. And that terrified her more than any boardroom battle ever had. The contraction started on a cold October night. Katherine was alone in the estate library, reading a report she no longer cared about, when the first wave of pain hit. She gasped, clutching the armrest, her water breaking onto the Persian rug beneath her. "Claire!" she shouted, her voice sharp with panic. Within minutes, her assistant had called the private medical team. Doctors bound by confidentiality agreements, nurses who wouldn't ask questions. They arrived in an unmarked van, transforming the estate's master bedroom into a sterile delivery suite. Katherine labored for 9 hours. No epidural, no comfort, just pain that rewired every nerve in her body and reminded her she was, despite everything, still human. "Push, Ms. Whitmore," the doctor urged. "One more," Katherine screamed, not the controlled, measured sound of a CEO, but something primal, raw, ancient. And then silence, followed by a cry. The doctor lifted the baby, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "It's a boy," he said quietly. But no one was smiling. Katherine reached out with trembling arms. "Let me see him." They placed the baby on her chest, and the world stopped. The child had ice-blue eyes, skin so pale it seemed almost translucent under the dim lights, features that didn't belong to her Mediterranean lineage or Marcus's African-American heritage. Katherine's heart stopped. "What?" she whispered. "What is this?" The doctor's face was pale. "Ms. Whitmore will run tests immediately." But Katherine barely heard him. She stared at the baby in her arms, the child she'd paid for, planned for, built her entire hope around, and realized, with cold, creeping horror, that something was terribly, impossibly wrong. Katherine named him Eli. It was the only decision that felt right in a moment where nothing else made sense. Eli Whitmore. She whispered the name against his forehead as the nurses worked in tense silence around her, their glances to one another speaking volumes they wouldn't dare voice aloud. "Ms. Whitmore," the head nurse finally said, her voice carefully neutral, "we're going to take the baby to run some routine tests." "Routine?" Katherine's voice was hoarse from screaming, but the CEO in her recognized evasion when she heard it. "What's wrong with him?" "Nothing is wrong," the doctor interjected smoothly, too smoothly. "We just want to make sure everything is as it should be." But Katherine saw it in their eyes. The confusion, the unease, the way they looked at Eli like he was a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. She watched them carry her son away, his pale skin almost glowing under the harsh medical lights, those impossible blue eyes staring at nothing and everything. Katherine Whitmore had negotiated with heads of state, stared down billionaire rivals, survived corporate assassinations that would have destroyed lesser executives. But in that moment, lying in a bed soaked with her own blood and sweat, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Helplessness. The first round of tests came back within hours. The doctor entered her private room with a tablet and an expression that Katherine had seen before. The face of someone about to deliver bad news disguised as good news. "Ms. Whitmore, the baby is healthy, strong vitals, no immediate medical concerns." "But?" Katherine sat up straighter despite the pain. The doctor hesitated. "But his appearance is unusual. Given your Mediterranean background and the father's African-American heritage, we would expect—" "I know what you would expect," Katherine interrupted sharply. "I want to know what you found." He pulled up images on the tablet. Eli's face in high definition, those crystalline eyes, skin so pale the veins showed through like rivers on a map. "We'd like to run genetic testing. With your permission." "Do it," Katherine said immediately. "And I want complete confidentiality. No one outside this room sees those results. No one." The doctor nodded. "It will take 48 hours for the full panel. I want it in 24. Ms. Whitmore." 24 hours, doctor. "Or I'll find someone who can deliver faster." He left without another word. Katherine didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eli's face. Those eyes that looked through her rather than at her. She thought about Marcus, somewhere in Queens, going about his life with no idea that the child they'd created together was... what? Wrong? Different? Impossible? Per the contract, Marcus had no right to information about the child. No contact, no updates, no involvement. Katherine had insisted on those terms. Now they felt like chains around her throat. The DNA results arrived at 3 a.m., delivered by courier in a sealed envelope marked confidential. Katherine tore it open with shaking hands. The first page confirmed what she already knew. She was the biological mother. Marcus Bennett was the biological father. The child was theirs. But the second page made her blood run cold. Subject exhibits genetic anomalies inconsistent with parental DNA. Foreign sequences detected in chromosomes 7, 11, and 19. Markers indicate potential genetic engineering. Enhanced cognition patterns noted. Non-human pattern recognition sequences present. Recommend immediate containment and further analysis. Katherine read it 3 times, then a 4th. The words blurred together, but certain phrases burned into her mind like brands. Engineered, non-human, containment. Her hands crumpled the paper. This wasn't possible. She had used a private clinic, vetted doctors, followed every protocol. This was supposed to be simple, clean, controlled. But nothing about Eli was simple. She grabbed her phone and called the lead geneticist, a woman named Dr. Bitsu. Sarah Chen, whom Katherine had personally hired for discretion and expertise. "I need you here, now. I don't care what time it is." Dr. Chen arrived within the hour, her face grim as she reviewed the results. "Ms. Whitmore, these sequences... I've never seen anything like this outside of theoretical research." "Explain it to me," Katherine demanded, "in plain English." Dr. Chen pulled up holographic models on her tablet. "Your son's DNA contains modifications that shouldn't exist naturally. Someone altered genetic material at some point in the lineage. These markers suggest cognitive enhancement, accelerated neural development, possibly even what?" Dr. Chen met her eyes. "Possibly even traits that aren't entirely human in origin, or were designed to be something more." The room tilted. Katherine gripped the bed rail. "How is that possible? I know Marcus. I know myself. Neither of us—" "It could be dormant sequences activated during conception. Or..." Dr. Chen hesitated. "Or someone tampered with the genetic material before insemination." Katherine's mind raced. The clinic. Project Haven. The process that was supposed to be straightforward and safe. "I want an investigation into that facility. Every doctor, every nurse, every sample that went through there. Now." "Ms. Whitmore, if someone did engineer this intentionally, they won't want you digging." "I don't care what they want. That's my son." It was Claire, her assistant, who found the security footage 3 days later. Katherine was holding Eli, trying to convince herself that the warmth of his tiny body against hers meant he was normal, that he was hers. When Claire burst into the room, her face white. "Ms. Whitmore, you need to see this." The laptop showed the security feed from the delivery room. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m., the peak of Katherine's labor. And then, at 11:52 p.m., the feed glitched. Static, darkness, complete blackout. When it returned, 17 minutes had passed. "I checked the backup systems," Claire said, her voice tight. "They're all corrupted. Same 17-minute gap. And look at this." She pulled up an enhanced frame from just before the glitch. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. Not a doctor, not a nurse. Someone else. Someone who had been in the room while Katherine was at her most vulnerable, while Eli was being born. Someone who had erased their own presence. Katherine's grip on Eli tightened. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Who the hell was in that room?" But the screen offered no answers, only questions that grew darker with every passing second. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a truth began to crystallize, cold, sharp, and undeniable. This child wasn't an accident. He was planned, and whoever planned him was still watching. Katherine didn't trust easily, but desperation made strange bedfellows. Within a week, her estate had transformed into a covert research facility. Scientists arrived in unmarked cars, signed NDAs thicker than medical textbooks, and set up equipment in rooms that once held nothing more dangerous than expensive art. Dr. Raymond Torres, an ex-military geneticist who'd worked on classified programs before retiring in disgrace, was the first to examine Eli's complete genome sequence. He sat in Katherine's study for 3 hours without speaking, his face growing paler with each passing minute. "Ms. Whitmore," he finally said, removing his glasses, "whoever designed this didn't just edit genes. They built something. This child's DNA contains artificial sequences I've only seen in theoretical weapons research." "Weapons?" Katherine's voice was ice. "Cognitive weapons. Enhanced pattern recognition, accelerated neural plasticity, possibly even—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Possibly even the ability to interface with electronic systems on an intuitive level." Katherine stared at Eli sleeping peacefully in his bassinet, his pale skin almost luminescent in the afternoon light. "You're telling me my son is a weapon?" "I'm telling you someone made him one. The question is why? And who?" That question led Katherine down a rabbit hole that would change everything. The paper trail was buried deep, hidden behind shell corporations and dissolved LLCs. But Katherine had resources most people couldn't dream of. She hired forensic accountants, corporate investigators, digital archaeologists who specialized in finding what people wanted forgotten. It took them 4 days to find it. 15 years ago, a clinic in the South Bronx called Genesis Biomed had operated for exactly 18 months before being raided by federal agents. The official story: illegal stem cell research. The clinic was shut down, records were sealed, and the case disappeared into bureaucratic oblivion. But Katherine's investigators found something the feds had missed. Genesis Biomed was owned by a shell company called Helix Innovations. Helix Innovations was funded by a venture capital firm called North Star Holdings, and North Star Holdings was a subsidiary of Whitmore Global. Katherine's own company had owned the clinic. She sat alone in her office, the discovery burning through her like acid. She'd been CEO for 12 years. This clinic had operated 3 years before she took control during her predecessor's tenure. But the program hadn't died when the clinic shut down. It had gone underground. And somehow, impossibly, Marcus Bennett's DNA had been part of it. 15 years earlier. Marcus had been 32, married for 3 years, working double shifts to save for Devon's college fund. Money was tight. When a clinic offered $5,000 for a simple DNA donation to help cancer research, it seemed like a gift from God. He'd gone to Genesis Biomed on a Tuesday morning, signed papers he barely read, and let them take vials of blood, tissue samples, even bone marrow. The doctor had been friendly, professional, reassuring. "You're helping save lives, Mr. Bennett. Your genetic profile is exceptional." Marcus had felt proud. He'd used the money to buy Diane a new car, one that didn't break down every other week. He'd felt like a provider, a good man. He never knew what they'd really wanted his DNA for. After the clinic was raided, Marcus had received a letter stating his samples had been destroyed per federal guidelines. He'd believed it. Why wouldn't he? But some ghosts don't stay buried. Marcus was walking home from work on a Friday evening when the stranger approached him. The man was tall, wearing an expensive suit that didn't belong in this Queens neighborhood, his face obscured by a fedora that seemed pulled from another era. Marcus Bennett, the man said. Not a question, a statement. Marcus's hand instinctively reached for the pocket knife he carried. Do I know you? No, but I know your son. Marcus froze. I don't have a son. The stranger smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You have a son named Eli, born 6 weeks ago, ice blue eyes, pale as moonlight. Ring any bells? Marcus's heart hammered. The contract. The NDA. He wasn't supposed to know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. The stranger handed him a card, plain white, no name, just a phone number written in elegant script. But when the dreams start, when you see things you can't explain, call this number. You're going to need help understanding what you created. I didn't create anything. The stranger's smile widened. Oh, Marcus, you created everything. You just didn't know it. He walked away, disappearing around a corner too quickly, too smoothly. Marcus stood there, the card burning in his hand, his mind racing. When the dreams start. But the dreams had already started. That night, Marcus dreamed again, but this time, it wasn't fire. He stood in a vast room filled with symbols he'd never seen but somehow understood. They glowed on walls that seemed to breathe, pulsing with light that felt alive. A language that wasn't English, wasn't any language spoken on Earth, yet Marcus could read it as clearly as his own name. In the center of the room stood a child, not Devon. Someone new, pale skin, blue eyes, staring at Marcus with an expression far too knowing for an infant. The child opened his mouth, and when he spoke, Marcus heard 2 voices, one young and innocent, the other ancient and terrible. We've been waiting for you, Father. Marcus woke up screaming, his sheets soaked with sweat. But the symbols from the dream remained burned into his vision, floating in the darkness of his bedroom like constellations. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands and pulled up a drawing app. His fingers moved on their own, sketching the symbols exactly as he'd seen them. When he finished, there were 12 distinct markings, each intricate and precise. Marcus stared at them, his breath coming in short gasps. He didn't know what they meant, but he knew with absolute certainty that they were real, and that they were connected to the child he'd helped create, a child he was never supposed to know existed. Marcus reached for the white card on his nightstand, the stranger's phone number staring back at him. His thumb hovered over the digits. Somewhere across the state, in a mansion he'd never seen, his son, slept peacefully, those impossible blue eyes closed, while genetic code that shouldn't exist rewrote the rules of what it meant to be human. And both Marcus and Katherine, separated by distance and secrets, were beginning to realize the same terrifying truth. They hadn't created a child. They'd awakened something that had been waiting, buried in their very DNA, for the right moment to emerge. The question wasn't what Eli was. The question was, what did he want? Eli Whitmore spoke his first full sentence at 4 months old. Katherine had been sitting in the nursery, exhausted from another sleepless night when she heard it. Not babbling, not baby sounds. Words. "The light hurts, Mother." She'd dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor, but Katherine barely noticed. She stared at her son, who stared back with those unsettling blue eyes, waiting patiently for her to turn down the lamp. Which she did, with trembling hands. That was only the beginning. By 6 months, Eli was walking, not toddling or stumbling, but walking with the confident gait of a child 3 times his age. By 8 months, he was reading, not picture books, but actual text. Katherine had left a medical journal on the coffee table, and she'd found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping pages, his tiny finger tracing words like chromosome and mitochondrial. "Eli, do you understand what you're reading?" she'd asked, her voice barely a whisper. He'd looked up at her with an expression that made her skin crawl. Too knowing, too aware. "Yes, Mother, it's about me." Now, at 12 months old, Eli was drawing. Katherine watched from the doorway as her son sat at his toddler table, a box of crayons scattered around him, drawing symbols that looked simultaneously ancient and alien. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Spirals that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. "Eli, where did you learn to draw those?" "I remember them," he said simply, switching from a red crayon to black. "From before." "Before what?" He didn't answer. He just kept drawing. The incidents with electronics started subtly. A lamp would flicker when Eli walked past. The television would change channels when he looked at it. Katherine had dismissed it as faulty wiring, old equipment, coincidence. Then she'd watched him touch her dead phone, the battery completely drained, and seen it power on instantly, the screen glowing bright as if fully charged. "How did you—" Eli had simply smiled. "Things listen to me." Katherine hired specialists, child psychologists, neurologists, even a physicist who specialized in bioelectric fields. They all left with more questions than answers, their equipment malfunctioning in Eli's presence, their theories crumbling under the weight of what he could do. One doctor had whispered to Katherine on his way out, "Ms. Whitmore, that child isn't human. Not entirely." She'd fired him on the spot, but she couldn't fire the truth. Katherine knew she needed Marcus. She'd broken the contract's terms by even considering it, but nothing about this situation fell within normal parameters anymore. Marcus was Eli's father, and whatever was happening to their son, whatever he was, Marcus deserved to know. Besides, Marcus was having the dreams. Katherine's investigators had confirmed it. He'd been seen wandering at night, sketching symbols identical to the ones Eli drew. They were connected, father and son, in ways that went deeper than DNA. The call was brief. "Mr. Bennett, this is Katherine Whitmore. I need you to come to my estate. It's about the child." Silence. Then, "Something's wrong, isn't it?" "Everything is wrong. How soon can you be here?" "I'm already on my way." Marcus arrived at sunset, looking cleaner than when Katherine had first met him, but carrying shadows she recognized. The weight of knowing something terrible was coming. Claire led him to the living room where Katherine waited. Eli playing quietly with wooden blocks on the carpet. Normal. Innocent. Except the blocks were arranging themselves into patterns without the boy touching them. Marcus stopped in the doorway, his breath catching. "That's him?" "That's Eli," Katherine confirmed. For a moment, no one moved. Father and son separated by a contract and a year of silence, finally in the same room. Then Eli looked up. Those ice-blue eyes locked onto Marcus's face, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Eli stood, the blocks falling silent, and walked toward Marcus with that too confident gait. He stopped 3 feet away, tilting his head like he was examining something fascinating. "I know you," Eli said, his voice clear and certain. "From before the fire." Marcus's face went gray. His knees buckled and he grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. "What? What did you say?" "I know you from before the fire," Eli repeated, stepping closer. "When you were whole. When we were together." Katherine was on her feet. "Eli, what are you talking about?" But Marcus understood. His hand went to his mouth, and a sound escaped him, half sob, half gasp. "No, no, that's not possible." "What isn't possible?" Katherine demanded. Marcus slid down the doorframe until he was sitting on the floor, his eyes never leaving Eli. "Diane," he whispered. "My wife. Before Devon was born, she was pregnant, about 6 months along. We were so happy. We'd already picked out a name." He paused, his breath shaking. "She miscarried, hemorrhaged at work. They rushed her to the hospital. They tried to save the baby, but it was too late. The doctor said—" His voice cracked. "The doctor said they needed to take the fetus for testing, to understand what went wrong. Standard procedure, they said." Katherine felt ice spreading through her veins. "Marcus, what hospital?" "Genesis Medical Center, in the Bronx." He looked up at her, and she saw the truth dawning in his eyes. It was affiliated with a clinic. A research clinic. "Genesis Biomed," Katherine breathed. Marcus nodded slowly. "They took my son's body. They said they'd cremate it, return the ashes. They never did. And when I went back 3 months later, the whole facility was shut down. Condemned." Eli knelt in front of Marcus, his small hand reaching out to touch the man's face. It was a gesture of comfort, but there was something ancient in it, something that didn't belong to a 1-year-old child. "They didn't throw me away, Father," Eli said softly. "They kept me, studied me, used me, and when the time was right, when you gave them more of yourself." He turned to look at Katherine. "And when she wanted something only we could give, they put me back together." Katherine's legs gave out. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing through impossible conclusions that suddenly made perfect sense. "You're saying I'm the son Marcus lost 15 years ago," Eli said simply, "and the son Katherine lost 28 years ago, and something else, something they built from our pain, our grief, our stolen pieces." He smiled, and for the first time it looked like a child's smile. Innocent. Sad. I'm what happens when science finds ghosts and decides to make them walk again. Marcus was weeping silently, his hands covering his face. Katherine sat frozen, her entire world rewritten in the span of minutes. Their son wasn't a miracle or a mistake. He was a resurrection. And somewhere, whoever had orchestrated this was waiting to see what their creation would do next. Katherine Whitmore had built her empire on calculated risks and ruthless decisions. But walking into the Whitmore Global boardroom with a folder full of evidence that could destroy everything she'd worked for, that was a new kind of gamble. The 12 board members looked up as she entered, their expressions ranging from curious to annoyed. They hadn't expected her. She'd been on sabbatical for over a year. "Katherine," Chairman Robert Hastings said with forced warmth. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting—" "Genesis Biomed," Katherine cut him off, slamming the folder onto the mahogany table. "I want to know everything about it. Now." The room went silent. Several board members exchanged glances. Hastings's smile faltered. "Katherine, I don't know what you think you've found, but I found my son's DNA spliced with sequences that shouldn't exist. I found a clinic my company owned that was experimenting on stolen fetal tissue. I found a paper trail connecting Whitmore Global to genetic engineering programs that were supposed to be shut down 20 years ago." Her voice was ice. "So I'll ask again, what the hell did you do?" Dr. Lawrence Webb, head of the biotech division, cleared his throat. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that inspired trust. Right now it looked like stone. "Ms. Whitmore, you're making accusations based on incomplete information. My son is the information, Lawrence, and he's proof that someone in this company has been playing God with people's grief." "Katherine, please sit down," Hastings urged. "Let's discuss this rationally." "I'm done being rational. Either you tell me the truth or I go to the press. Every network, every journalist, every regulatory body that will listen. I'll burn this company to the ground if I have to." Webb stood abruptly. "You don't know what you're threatening to expose." "Then enlighten me." Webb's jaw tightened. Then, to Katherine's surprise, he laughed, bitter and tired. "You want the truth? Fine. Project Haven wasn't shut down 20 years ago. It went underground, rebranded, refinanced, because the potential was too valuable to abandon." Katherine's blood turned to ice. Project Haven. Cognitive enhancement through trauma-integrated DNA. The theory was simple. Genetic material from fetuses that died during profound maternal distress carried unique markers. Stress hormones, epigenetic changes, survival mechanisms activated at the moment of death. We believed we could isolate those traits and use them to create enhanced cognitive function. "You stole dead babies," Katherine whispered. "We preserved genetic material that would have been destroyed anyway," Webb corrected coldly. "And yes, your daughter was part of the initial sample collection, as was Marcus Bennett's unborn son, among dozens of others." The room spun. Katherine gripped the table. "The boy wasn't supposed to survive," came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. A woman stood there, late 50s, wearing a lab coat, her face haggard. Dr. Ellen Reyes. Katherine recognized her from old company photos. She'd been the lead geneticist on the biotech team before disappearing 5 years ago. Ellen. Webb's face paled. You were supposed to die quietly. Ellen stepped into the room. Sorry to disappoint, Ms. Whitmore. You need to take your son and run. The people who funded this project don't care about your threats. They'll take Eli, study him, and when they're done, they'll erase him like they've erased everything else. Who? Katherine demanded. Who's behind this? Ellen looked at Hastings. Tell her, Robert. Tell her who really owns Whitmore Global. 3 hours later, Katherine and Marcus were speeding north in an unmarked SUV, Eli strapped safely in the back seat, his blue eyes watching the landscape blur past. Ellen had given them everything: encrypted files, genetic reports, financial records. The truth was worse than Katherine had imagined. Project Haven had been funded by a consortium of pharmaceutical companies, military contractors, and private investors who saw cognitive enhancement as the next evolution of warfare and commerce. Whitmore Global had been the public face, but the real power belonged to people whose names never appeared on any official documents. Katherine's daughter, Haven, had died in 1997. Her tissue was collected and stored. Marcus's unborn son had died in 2010. His tissue was added to the archive. The program's goal: create a viable hybrid that combined multiple trauma-borne genetic sequences. Failed attempts numbered in the hundreds. Most embryos didn't survive past a few weeks. Those that did were terminated due to severe abnormalities. Eli was the first success, but his creation hadn't been random. They waited, Marcus said, reading from Ellen's files on a tablet. They waited until I donated DNA again in 2024. They needed fresh genetic material from me to activate the stored sequences. And they needed me to carry him, Katherine added, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Someone knew I'd be desperate enough to go off book. Someone guided me to you. Marcus looked back at Eli, who was drawing symbols on a fogged window with his finger. He's not just our son, Marcus said quietly. He's every child we lost, every grief we carried. They took our pain and made it into something they could use. He's a weapon, Katherine whispered. No. Eli's voice cut through the car. I'm a convergence. Mother's loss, father's loss, science's greed, all merged into one body. He turned those ancient eyes on them. I'm what happens when buried sins refuse to stay buried. They stopped at a safe house in Vermont, a cabin owned by a contact Ellen had provided. As they settled in, Katherine's phone buzzed. An unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Mrs. Whitmore. The voice was smooth, male, unfamiliar. You have something that belongs to us. Eli belongs to no one. Eli is intellectual property developed with billions in research funding. He represents 20 years of work. You can't hide him forever. Watch me. We know where you are. We've always known. The question is, how long do you think you can run before we decide to stop being polite? The line went dead. Katherine looked at Marcus, then at Eli, who sat calmly on the couch, drawing those impossible symbols. "They're coming," she said. "I know," Marcus replied, checking the gun Ellen had given them, a weapon he'd hoped never to hold again. Eli looked up from his drawing. "They'll come, but they don't understand what I am yet. They think they made a weapon. They don't realize they made something that can unmake them." His smile was unsettling, part child, part something far older. "Let them come, Mother. Let them see what buried sins look like when they finally crawl back into the light." Outside in the darkness beyond the cabin, headlights appeared on the distant road. The past was coming, and it wanted its creation back. The writing appeared on the cabin walls 3 nights after they arrived. Katherine woke to find Eli standing on a chair, his small hand moving across the wood paneling in fluid strokes. Not crayon, not marker. The symbols seemed to burn themselves into the surface, glowing faintly before fading to charred black. "Eli, what are you doing?" He didn't turn around. "Remembering." Marcus emerged from the other bedroom, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Then he froze, staring at the wall. That's Haitian Creole," he whispered. "Old Haitian Creole. From the colonial period." Katherine looked at him sharply. "How do you know that?" "I don't know. I know." Marcus stepped closer, his finger tracing the air above the symbols. "It says, 'The blood remembers what the mind forgets. The chains are broken, but the scars remain. We return through the children of both oppressor and oppressed.'" Eli climbed down from the chair and looked at them both with those unsettling blue eyes. "I didn't learn it, Mother. I remember it. From before. From them." "Them?" Katherine knelt beside him. "Who is them, Eli?" "Everyone whose blood is in me. Everyone who died screaming. Everyone whose stories were buried." He touched his own chest. "They all live here, waiting." Ellen's files had mentioned it. Genetic memory, the theoretical ability for DNA to carry not just biological traits, but experiential data across generations. Most scientists dismissed it as pseudoscience, but Eli was proof it existed. Dr. Reyes had included a contact in her files. Mama Josephine, a Haitian priestess living in Brooklyn who'd helped with the original Project Haven research before refusing to continue. "She understood what we were really doing," Ellen had written. "And she was horrified." Katherine and Marcus had no choice. They needed answers only someone outside the scientific community could provide. They drove to Brooklyn under cover of darkness, Eli wrapped in a blanket, his eyes reflecting passing streetlights like a cat's. Mama Josephine's shop was tucked between a bodega and a laundromat, its windows crowded with candles, herbs, and symbols that made Katherine's skin prickle. The woman who answered their knock was ancient, skin like weathered mahogany, eyes that seemed to look through flesh into soul. She took one look at Eli and gasped. Mon Dieu! They actually did it. You know what he is? Marcus asked. I know what he carries. Mama Josephine ushered them inside, locking the door behind them. Her shop smelled of sage, rum, and something older, earth and blood and history. She circled Eli slowly, her lips moving in silent prayer. Then she knelt and took his small hands in her gnarled ones. You are Zvel Revenon, a returned soul, not one soul, but many. Your spirit is a crossroads where the dead meet the living. She looked up at Katherine and Marcus. This child is an ancestor walking in infant flesh. That's impossible, Katherine said, though her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Mama Josephine stood with effort. Your scientists stole genetic material from the dead, yes? From babies who died in pain, in grief, in trauma? DNA is memory, Ms. Whitmore, and trauma burns deepest of all. You didn't just mix genetic code, you mixed souls. She pulled out a leather journal, flipping to pages covered in symbols identical to what Eli had been drawing. These are Mapu marks, sacred symbols from the Haitian Revolution, used by enslaved people to communicate, to remember who they were when the world tried to make them forget. She pointed at Eli. He writes them because their blood flows in him, not metaphorically, literally. Marcus sank into a chair. The dreams. I keep seeing things. Plantations burning, chains breaking, people I've never met calling my name. Those are his memories bleeding into you, Mama Josephine explained. Father and son, connected by more than DNA. You dream what he remembers because your bloodlines are tangled now, colonizer and colonized, oppressor and oppressed, all meeting in this one child. The genetic reports mentioned a third strand, Katherine said. Unknown origin, European, colonial-era markers. Mama Josephine nodded grimly. The DNA they used wasn't just from your losses. They added sequences from old bloodlines, families who made their fortunes in slavery, in exploitation. They wanted to see what would happen when you forced the descendant of the enslaved and the descendant of the master to create life together. They wanted to weaponize history itself. That's monstrous, Katherine breathed. That's America, Mama Josephine corrected. This country was built on forced mixing, on violence disguised as science, on treating human beings like experiments. Your son is that legacy made flesh. He is every buried sin given voice. Eli spoke then. His voice layered, multiple tones speaking simultaneously, some young, some ancient, some in languages no one present understood. I am the reckoning. I am the answer to every unanswered prayer, every unavenged death, every child stolen from their mother's arms. I am what happens when you try to bury the past and it grows teeth. The lights in the shop flickered. Candles flared bright enough to hurt. Then everything went still. Mama Josephine crossed herself. They're coming for him. I can feel them. Men who think they can own what they created. We know, Marcus said. We've been running for weeks. Running won't save you. You have two choices. Run until they catch you, or expose the truth, Katherine finished. Show the world what they did, what Eli is. If you do that, you'll make him a target forever, Mama Josephine warned. But you'll also make it impossible for them to disappear him quietly. The world will be watching. They left Brooklyn as dawn broke, Eli asleep in the back seat, his small hand clutching a gris-gris bag Mama Josephine had given him for protection. Katherine drove in silence, her mind churning. Marcus stared out the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. The dreams, he said finally. I understand them now. Every nightmare, every vision. They're not mine. They're his. They're all the people whose DNA lives in him. Slaves who died in chains, children who died in fires, mothers who lost everything. He turned to look at her. We're not just his parents, Kate. We're vessels. He was born through us, but he belongs to something bigger. He belongs to himself, Katherine said fiercely. I don't care what Mama Josephine says, or what those genetic reports claim. Eli is a person, not a symbol, not a weapon, not a reckoning, a child. A child who can rewrite electronics with his mind and speaks in dead languages, Marcus reminded her gently. A child whose very existence is proof of crimes most people don't want to believe happened. Katherine's hands tightened on the wheel. So what do we do? Marcus pulled out his phone. On the screen was a list of journalists Ellen had provided. People who'd investigated corporate crimes before, who had the platform and the courage to publish what most would bury. We tell the story, all of it. We expose Project Haven, Whitmore Global, everyone involved. We make Eli's existence impossible to ignore. They'll come after us harder than ever. I know, but Mama Josephine was right. If the world knows, they can't make him disappear quietly. And maybe... He looked back at Eli, still sleeping peacefully despite the chaos surrounding him. Maybe that's why he exists. Not to be a weapon, but to be proof. Proof that the past doesn't stay buried. Proof that sins have consequences. Proof that the dead don't forget. Katherine nodded slowly. Then she pulled over and took the phone from Marcus's hand. She selected the first name on the list, Sarah Chen, investigative journalist with the Washington Post, and began typing an email that would change everything. My name is Katherine Whitmore. I am the CEO of Whitmore Global, and I need to tell you about a crime that started 20 years ago and ended with the birth of my son. She attached every file Ellen had given them, every genetic report, every financial record, every piece of evidence that proved Project Haven had never really ended. Her finger hovered over send. Once we do this, there's no going back, Marcus said. There was no going back the moment I signed that contract with you, Katherine replied. We've been moving toward this since the beginning. We just didn't know it yet. She pressed send. In the back seat, Eli opened his eyes and smiled, sad, knowing, ancient. "Thank you, Mother. Thank you, Father, for giving them back their voices." And in boardrooms and research facilities across the country, phones began to ring with news that would unravel everything. The buried sins were coming to light, and they had a name: Eli Whitmore. The email went viral in less than 12 hours. By the time Katherine's phone started exploding with calls from journalists, federal investigators, and panicked board members, the story had already been picked up by every major news outlet. CEO exposes own company's illegal genetic experiments. Project Haven, the children who should never have existed. Whitmore Global accused of crimes against humanity. Katherine sat in the safe house, watching her empire crumble on live television, and felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: relief. But relief was a luxury they couldn't afford yet. They came at dawn on the third day after the story broke. Marcus saw them first, 3 black SUVs moving up the dirt road toward the cabin. Too fast, too deliberate. He grabbed the gun Ellen had given them and shouted for Katherine. "They're here!" Katherine scooped Eli into her arms. The boy was calm, unnaturally so, his blue eyes reflecting the morning light like mirrors. "It's okay, Mother," he said softly. "This is how it was always supposed to happen." "Nothing about this is okay," Katherine shot back, moving toward the back exit. But the rear door burst open before they reached it. Men in tactical gear poured in. No police markings, no identification. Private military, corporate enforcers. The lead operative pointed a weapon at Katherine. "Miss Whitmore, put the child down. We're here to secure the asset." "His name is Eli," Marcus growled, raising his own gun, "and he's not an asset, he's a person." "Mr. Bennett, you're not authorized to be here. Step aside." "Like hell I will." The standoff lasted 3 seconds. Then Eli did something no one expected. He screamed. Not a child's cry, but something else. A sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls, through the air, through everything. The lights exploded. Electronics sparked and died. Every weapon in the room went dead, their digital components fried in an instant. The operatives stumbled back, clutching their heads, blood trickling from their ears. Eli's eyes blazed with light that shouldn't exist in human biology. White-blue, electric, ancient. "I am not an asset," he said, his voice layered with dozens of tones, some male, some female, some neither. "I am a testament. I am proof. And you cannot contain what you created from stolen souls." The front door exploded inward, not from more operatives, from journalists. Sarah Chen from the Washington Post led the charge, cameras rolling, microphones live. "Ms. Whitmore, is this the child from your report? Are these men attempting to kidnap him?" The operatives froze. Live cameras, witnesses, the one thing their employers couldn't afford. Katherine stepped forward, still holding Eli, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Yes, this is my son, Eli Whitmore. And these men work for the same people who created him illegally, using stolen genetic material from dead children. The same people who've been trying to silence the truth for 20 years. The cameras captured everything. The armed men, the destroyed electronics, Eli's impossible eyes. The world was watching now. The operatives retreated, their leader speaking urgently into a dead radio before ordering his team out. They left without another word, disappearing into the SUVs that sped away like shadows fleeing dawn. Marcus lowered his gun, his hands shaking. Katherine held Eli tighter, and Sarah Chen smiled grimly. "Ms. Whitmore, I think we need to have a very long conversation." 1 year later, Eli's second birthday became a global event. Not by choice, but by necessity. The world demanded to see the child who'd exposed one of the darkest corporate conspiracies in modern history. The boy who represented hundreds of stolen lives, decades of buried crimes, and the ultimate proof that some sins refuse to stay hidden. Katherine had stepped down as CEO of Whitmore Global 3 months after the story broke. The company was being dismantled piece by piece. Lawsuits, federal investigations, criminal charges that would take years to fully prosecute. She'd liquidated her personal assets, established a victims fund for the families whose children had been stolen for Project Haven and disappeared from the public eye. But today, she stood beside Marcus on a platform outside the New York Public Library, where Eli would speak publicly for the first time. Thousands had gathered. Cameras from every nation pointed at the small stage. Marcus held Eli's hand. Marcus, who'd been granted full legal guardianship after Katherine insisted. "You're his father in every way that matters," she'd told him. "I gave birth to him, but you gave him a future." Eli walked to the microphone. At 2 years old, he stood barely 3 feet tall, but his presence filled the space like a grown man. His pale skin seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. His blue eyes swept across the crowd with ancient recognition. When he spoke, his voice carried, not just through speakers, but through something deeper. Everyone listening felt it in their bones. "My name is Eli Whitmore. I was made from pain, from mothers who lost children, fathers who lost hope, ancestors who lost their names and their freedom. I carry their DNA, their memories, their stolen futures in every cell of my body." The crowd was silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. "I was not supposed to exist. I was an experiment, a weapon, a sin that powerful people tried to bury. But I am here, and I am not alone. Every child who was taken, every life that was stolen, they live in me. They speak through me." He paused, those impossible eyes scanning the thousands of faces watching him. "I was made from pain, but I'm here to heal, to remember what the world tried to forget, to give voice to the silenced, to prove that no matter how deep you bury the truth, it will always find a way back to the light." He looked back at Marcus, then at Katherine standing slightly apart from them. "I am my mother's legacy and my father's redemption. I am the child of grief and science and greed, but most of all—" He smiled, and for just a moment, He looked like a normal 2-year-old. I am proof that love can exist even in the darkest experiments. That family can be found even in the most broken places. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in something deeper, a collective exhale, a release of tension that had built over months of revelations and horror. Marcus lifted Eli into his arms, tears streaming down his face. The boy who'd lost everything had somehow gained the most impossible gift. Katherine watched from the edge of the platform, her heart splitting open in ways she didn't know were possible. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the cameras finally shut off, Katherine found them in a quiet corner of the library gardens. Marcus was teaching Eli to identify flowers, normal, mundane, beautiful. She approached slowly, uncertain if she still belonged in this picture. Eli saw her first. He ran to her on toddling legs that were finally age-appropriate, his arms outstretched. "Mother!" She caught him, buried her face in his white blonde hair, and wept. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I brought you into this world as a transaction. I'm sorry I thought I could control something that should only ever be born from love." "You gave me life," Eli said simply. "Everything else, we figured out together." Marcus joined them, his hand gentle on Katherine's shoulder. "You want to stay?" he asked. "We're getting pizza. Eli's never had pizza." Katherine laughed through her tears. "Pizza. After everything, pizza." "After everything," Marcus agreed. "Normal is the most radical thing we can choose." They walked together through the gardens, an impossible family forged from corporate greed, stolen DNA, and somehow, impossibly, love. Katherine watched Marcus explain pizza toppings to Eli with the patience of a man who'd lost everything and learned what actually mattered. She watched her son, their son, laugh like a normal child while carrying the memories of hundreds inside him. And she whispered, so quietly only she could hear, "You weren't just the legacy I wanted. You were the truth I needed." Eli looked back at her, his ancient eyes softening with understanding. Then he smiled, grabbed both of their hands, and pulled them forward into the future, uncertain, imperfect, but finally free from the buried sins of the past. In boardrooms across the world, powerful people watched the broadcast and knew their time was ending. In research facilities still running illegal programs, scientists looked at their work and wondered if they were creating children or monsters. And in a small apartment in Queens, a mother whose child had been stolen 23 years ago watched Eli's speech and wept, not from grief, but from recognition. Her son's eyes looked back at her from that pale, impossible face, and for the first time since the hospital had taken her baby's body for research, she felt him smile. The dead were not gone. They were just waiting for the right voice to bring them home.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.